What's up, Diablo 4 and Path of Exile players? Let's talk about the problems that Diablo 4 and Path of Exile sort of had. This will also tie into PoE 2 as well, as most of these things will be transferring over. So I want to talk about how each game kind of tackles the problem. And I kind of put it in quotations because for some people these may not seem like a problem, but there's always going to be players that, have different experiences. The first one that I want to actually talk about has to do with the trade system in the game. Now, both of the games, as far as we are aware of, we don't have like an in-game built system that we can just trade in-game. And technically you could say, well, Diablo lets you open up the window and you can trade, but there's not like a proper way to actually do it in-game to find items to trade. I mean, you could spam the trade channel chat, but this is a very big deal with Diablo 4, and it's even worse with Diablo 4 because in Diablo 4 there are duped items, and if you get a duped item, what happens sometimes is the item will actually poof out of your inventory, which is way terrible. So Path of Exile is a lot safer to actually trade with, but it is a major issue with Diablo in general with trading in the game, especially because the website isn't as good as I would say Path of Exile's website. The best way to actually trade in Diablo is to actually utilize different websites, as well as using like Discord. Discord's probably the best way to trade in Diablo, and it is still kind of annoying because you have to search through so many just like images and stuff, whereas Path of Exile, the way that they do trade is way better. Now, I would say Path of Exile's trade isn't really that much of a problem. Sometimes though, with certain currencies, if you try to trade, what happens is you get a bunch of people that don't respond. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about scamming later in Path of Exile, but that is not as big of a deal. The reason why I say it's not as big of a deal, I've been playing this game for thousands of hours, and I've only been scammed a handful of times, and it's usually at like the very end, and if you pay attention, you're not really going to get scammed. But like most of the time with Path of Exile, as far as trading goes, when they scam you, a lot of times it will be someone accidentally giving you the like wrong item. Most of the time with Path of Exile, I would say the player base is a lot more respectable. You don't run into so many scumbags, so to speak, whereas with Diablo, since it is a more casual game, people will be trying to do certain things. But again, the player base for the PoE, I would say, is a little bit more on the area where it's a more advanced gamer. Like, they don't have time to deal with this sort of thing, if that kind of makes any sense. But another thing I want to talk about is like endgame in Diablo, and in the current game state, it's kind of just going into the pit, right, for the endgame. And well, I would say that this is definitely a bigger issue with Diablo 4. Path of Exile's endgame isn't really necessarily a problem, but I want to kind of tackle some of the things that some people were talking about. And this basically comes down to Diablo going up to like an endgame boss, and then you just one-shot the endgame boss again and again. If you want the mythics, the mythic uniques, that's what you're basically doing, right? Whereas with Path of Exile, there is so much more to do. Now, to be fair, Diablo 4 with Season 7 is getting some newer content, but it's like, I kind of put that in quotations because technically Diablo's new season, Season 7, is going to be a mixture of Season 1 and 2, which is we get like these little sockets, these legendary gems to put in our jewelry, and they give us number stats. So just bigger damage, bigger number, better, right? But we are also getting these like different colored hell tides, which when you turn these in, they will have a boss. Now, I'm not sure how difficult this boss will be, and I'm kind of concerned about Diablo 4's future with the way that they are tackling seasons, because a lot of times the seasonal mechanic is like, okay, you do it takes like 5-10 minutes, you do it, and like it's kind of like, well, whatever. It didn't really feel like it changed up the game, but now we are getting some season power, so that will tie into like more damage, more numbers, and we can do, I guess, a higher number of the pit. But there is one newer boss that we're getting. Again, if it's open world content, I kind of expected to slap it once I'm at the end game. But with Path of Exile, I wouldn't really say this is even a problem, but I kind of want to tackle the problem of it being kind of too complex, and I totally get that, but the way I view it is, even though it's going to be very complex, that allows you to maybe watch a YouTube video. As a content creator, this is like exciting because I get to make like guides, and I genuinely do have fun. But they show off like the endgame system over here, and you're gonna have like these little like kind of like maps, and you put them in, and there is gonna be some differences with PoE 2, as when you put in the map, if you fail it, it kind of blocks off that area, so you may lose out on some certain like areas if you don't complete it, but you cannot brick your map, which is kind of obviously a good thing. But there is so many more forms of endgame content that they actually showed off. There's a lot more ways to kind of play the endgame. Essentially, think of it kind of like the pit, but you have all of these different modifiers, and each one of these modifiers, whether you want to do breach or ritual, these have their own mechanics, and it is big enough to the point where I want to say that you're able to kind of play only that sort of mechanic. Now, some of them you just go and you kill monsters. Some of them you're going to actually have to read exactly what you're interacting with. But this isn't necessarily a problem, again, but I want to say there could be a problem for the first-time players when you don't read some of the stuff, because there are certain things, like if you do Expedition, and it says monsters are all immune to fire damage, and you're playing a fire build, just don't get that. And I know for a lot of new players, they're going to run to this and be like, dude, this is OP, this game's impossible. If you ever played Diablo 2, well, some monsters happen to be immune to certain things, so that means you either have to play with a party, or have a hybrid build, or some way to maybe break those resistances, if that's available. I don't know if we have Sundered Charms here in PoE 2, but basically, I'm just warning you guys, in PoE, you have to actually make sure you pay attention in the game when you are looking at some of the things that you can do. And also, like, this game, technically, they said endgame trials. I'm not sure if we're going to get some sort of enchant system like in PoE 1, but that could be another form of endgame content. Basically, I'm saying PoE's endgame isn't necessarily a problem. There is enough activities to do, whereas Diablo definitely lacks the amount of things to do in the endgame, which is, I think, one thing that they really need to do to solve that problem. But PoE's problem is mostly that, like, you're going to have to actually read. And I know that there's going to be people that don't read, but nonetheless, we'll have guides and stuff in the future. Now, another thing I want to talk about that is a major problem in Diablo 4 is some of the, like, skills in the game. Like, someone did the math over here on some of like the newer like aspects, and keep in mind, so some of these are like subject to change, or like some of these new uniques. He's looking at the numbers, he's like, well, I do this amount of damage, and then if I was to compare it to with this other thing, I do actually less damage, or I could do 100% more damage, but it hits double baseball lightning damage. So it explodes, but it's half as many hits, so then you're really not getting a bigger number. It's just that, like, the number's bigger, but you're hitting less times, right? And to be fair with this, like, you can math out the things. I used to do this in Diablo. I'd be like, I would try to math out some builds, but then what really happens with this game is, at least in Diablo 4, there's more of a Diablo 4 problem than a PoE problem, whereas, like, you look at a skill, and it's, in Diablo, it's either super OP, or it's, like, terrible and unusable. It's not even a skill, like, no one's going to be playing it. And I think that is a big issue, because in Diablo 4, a lot of the best builds, it's always a bug, it's always a glitch, it's always some sort of, like, exploit that people are doing to actually be able to make a good build. You can't really look at the numbers and kind of throw them to, like, let's say, path of building, and then be like, okay, this is going to be, like, numerically, this is the best build, because the best things time and time again have been bugged. Now, they are trying to squish the bugs in Diablo 4, but, you know, I hope it does happen in Season 7 where they kind of fix some of these things, but in reality, it's really hard to kind of make a build, whereas Path of Exile, again, you can take some of, like, the newer ideas, and sometimes when, like, there's, like, the community fork with Path of Building, and you kind of, like, math out what is an actual good build in the game. So it is definitely a pretty big issue. You can see this person saying, like, look at with this thing, 25 stacks, so 25 skill points of those that does 2.5 million damage versus this that does 90k. Sure, the other one is damage over time, but you can have the thing not even apply the damage over time with a key passive anyways. So it's just like there's a definite issue with balance, and I would say this is more of a Diablo problem than PoE. As far as PoE goes, and this goes again time and time again with Diablo, it's like with like this couch co-op bug over here, where like this person kind of summed up what I think a lot of people feel about Diablo 4's current game state. It's like, we hear you, we're looking into it, and they say that this is like a Diablo-like response. Because it is true. I've been wanting the armory for so long in the game, because, like, you know, it's going to be really awesome to be able to swap builds, so you don't get too burnt out of playing the same thing again and again. But they are finally adding the armory, which is a great thing, but again, a lot of times these bugs are reported again and again, and then they're like, okay, we got it. And it takes too long to kind of fix some of these bugs. Now, technically, PoE has had some bugs, you know, in the past, and they are a little bit faster on addressing certain issues. There is one with Eternal Blessing that would give you basically like a free, like a physical damage buff like Aura. There's other ways that people were using this, but they squished this pretty dang fast. So Diablo's philosophy was that they're not going to like nerf anything. However, there is some inconsistencies with this. Like, I don't know if any of you guys remember the potion, the anti-venom. It was super OP, but that only lasted 1 day. So that bug, that was something that they had to squish immediately. But the Spirit-born bugs, well, those ones were able to stay for the whole season. So there is some inconsistencies. You know, the way I see it is like, well, you just got to do it while you can, and then if they nerf it, well, then you're out of luck. And while some people say that's unfortunate, this is the way the game works. I would say PoE's a little bit faster on nerfing things, but they don't try to nerf things in the middle of a like season. But this one definitely had this thing was definitely an offender. And then a lot of people were talking about like the crafting system in Diablo 4 kind of being a problem. Like, I'm not a fan of like the tempering and the masterworking system in terms of like, oh, you just RNG. It doesn't really seem like it's a great way to go ahead and have like your end game content be that you farm again and again and you just got to RNG. People feel like it's a casino, a lottery system where like, okay, the minimum amount of gold, abductite, and rawhide to like get something, especially on the 5 affixed items, it is crazy. Look at the minimum amount of gold that you have to spend over here. So it's 14 million, and then this is how much like abductite and rawhide it costs. But on the maximum one over here, the difference is massive. I mean, look at that. We're going from 5,000 abductite to 500,000. This is just someone's like math over here in terms of like what are the odds of getting it. And I didn't find this to be very fun in like the end game in the game when I wanted to get my good item. Whereas in Path of Exile, it's approached a little bit better. Trading is a lot better in Path of Exile, so that makes things much easier. But there is another problem with that, which is scamming, which, you know, that wasn't designed in the game, so I won't really fault them for that. But in Path of Exile, as far as it goes with crafting, you can't just like get an item and throw in all the prefixes and all the suffixes. You basically get an item and you can pretty much force certain things to roll on it, and then if you want to craft, usually the crafting though, it may be different with Path of Exile 2, but in PoE 1, how it was designed was that like you get to like throw like one thing on the thing, and while it does help to maybe block certain things, like Path of Exile crafting is very complex. It is where I would consider a very, very open way to actually have your crafting designed in the game. You have so many different ways to actually craft in the game, and I like this. I think it can be very overwhelming, and that would be considered kind of a problem when you get like an item. You could see on this exact like item, so I did like Convoking Wand, like let's say if I wanted +1 to all you know, spell or minions, I can check what are the chances of trying to get this, and what are the other things that can roll on it, what is the weight of it. A lot of these things in Diablo, we might not know when we're trying to reroll, like at the enchant, like when we reroll one thing at the occultist. It just seems like there are definitely things that have different weights, but they're not really explained. Now, PoE doesn't explain it like in the game. You just have to go to like a website. But there are tools out here that definitely do help out, because I want to say that there's definitely weighted things in Diablo, whereas PoE, there's weighted stuff as well. But there are so many tools that you have at your disposal to kind of be able to understand, and people have a lot of written guides on this is step 1, step 2, and it can be very overwhelming, but you don't have to actually craft in the game. I think one game that did crafting really well, if you guys have played Last Epoch, it's like beginner friendly. Path of Exile for crafting is not super beginner friendly if you go in blind, but the thing is that there's content creators like myself that I'll show you guys the steps on how to actually build like a good bow. Well, at least an easier way. Technically, there are harder ways to do things. I always try to keep mine like relatively beginner friendly. I don't do like the blocking where you have to like spend a lot of currency, whereas there are cheaper ways to actually craft with, like, let's say you get like a base item that's like fractured, then you throw an essence on it, and then you have like a pretty good item without, again, requiring like thousands of tries. But it is on the same level sometimes. If you're trying to get like the godliest thing, it's going to be pretty difficult. But I think that players that understand it in PoE understand how rare it is. But with Diablo, I want to say this is not a fun system. At least with PoE, I like the system a little bit more, but I'm not going to say that it is absolutely perfect. Just trying to keep people's expectations realistic. So one problem that Diablo 4 has, and that Path of Exile doesn't have. So some of these will be like problems that one game has that like the other one doesn't really have. Like Diablo 4, I would say, doesn't really have a problem for like an entry action RPG to get people hooked up. But Path of Exile definitely has that problem because the game is so like overwhelming when you open up that skill tree, right? But with Diablo 4, one thing that I really don't like is that the vendors are actually pointless. In PoE, there's a lot of what's called vendors or recipes, and in Path of Exile 2, there's going to be a bunch of other vendor recipes. Don't worry too much about like looking at this into it now, but I'm trying to tell you guys that the vendors actually have a purpose in the game. So if you're playing by yourself, you can actually use the vendors to actually get like some consistency, or maybe trade certain things, whether that's trading the currency so you can actually get the items that you want, or kind of like a reroll. There's a lot. Basically, the vendors do something, and I think that that is really good. A lot of people feel like that an auction house would really help out in Diablo 4, and I absolutely agree. It would be nicer because the way that the game is set up is definitely more of a casual friendly game. To require people, especially on console, to go to the third-party website or use their phone to try to like get some sort of trade going together, and then you have to message them on Battle.net, you have to add some random person as a friend. It's really clunky, and I think that Diablo 4 definitely needs an in-game auction house, whereas with PoE, I would like an in-game like trade system, but it's not that bad. You basically need 2 monitors though. Another thing I want to talk about is like Diablo 4 has had a lot of bugs. Things would fall through the floor. I remember like there was times where like for some reason Leap was like kind of glitched out, and there's a lot of like bugs and glitches in general in Diablo. Not even like the skills, but like certain things just like wouldn't be able to allow you to progress in the game. Like some monsters would spawn outside of like the boundary, and you couldn't kill the monster, and you needed to kill the monster to progress, whatever. And they have really been trying to get a lot of these bugs squished, but like we're like over a year in the game. We're in Season 7, and I was looking at some of the patch notes for Season 7, and a lot of the glyphs still didn't apply their damage reduction, which was really weird. But there have been bugs in PoE too, like or PoE in general. I'm just gonna use this as a reference. I don't know if any of you guys remember like the arch nemesis problem that people were complaining about. Like these monsters were crazy. They would teleport on you, one-shot you. It was out of control. Diablo 4 also kind of had these bugs, so I'm gonna say like it was fair in the sense where you know, both of these games kind of have this issue where they need to tone something down. Beast and Ice was bugged for a really long time, where like when you would spawn in, sometimes there would be like these elites that would come out and they would just straight up one-shot you. And PoE had this as well. They did address it, but this one took them about a week. Diablo, Beast and Ice lasted for like pretty much the end of like last season, and even earlier this season, it still was a problem. Another thing I want to talk about is a pretty big problem in Diablo 4 is the inventory, the management. Like you can't stack a certain amount of things, you run out of inventory, and there's really nothing that you can do about Diablo 4's inventory other than like you would buy multiple accounts. This was an issue where people couldn't hold the amount of gold that was even required to buy certain items, so you'd have to trade multiple times because gold got so inflated in the game because of dupes and stuff. But over here you can see the person is like kind of complaining about inventory, and with PoE, their way of solving inventory, like in terms of like I don't have enough room to hold all of my stuff, is that, well, you can buy it. Now, technically, Path of Exile is a free game, but it does allow you to buy storage in the game. Now, while I would not say that is pay to win, if you are trading, it does give you a pretty big advantage to have a bunch of items listed in your, premium stash tab, which is another thing that I think I'll reserve for like another video. But pretty much, this is a pretty big issue, I would say, in Diablo. But the reason why Diablo does not sell the stash space is because the way the game is designed is it loads everyone's stash, because that way you can actually trade the items with other players, and it's kind of like a bad design in a sense, because we don't have enough storage, especially if you want to play multiple characters and you're also listing all these items. It can become a huge problem that you don't have enough storage space. With PoE, I mean, you run out of storage, well, you can at least buy it. So there is kind of like a solution to the problem, but it does cost money. But again, since the game is free to play, I'm a little bit more lenient on it. And it's not like you need hundreds of stash tabs, but there are people out there that genuinely need it because they have so many things listed. Another thing I want to talk about in Diablo 4, and this was kind of a problem with specifically this season, with like if you don't play Spiritborn, you just didn't get a party, right? When we're comparing like Diablo 4 to the previous version of the game, we didn't have that social party finder when you're like, okay, I want to find a group for Pit. Well, if you're not playing Spiritborn, you just get kicked. But there's another thing where, like, if you join an area without boss materials, where, like, they're called rotas, or you do rotation runs, and you basically all would put in materials so you can all fight the bosses, and you're basically contributing to fighting these bosses. But a lot of people have been complaining about this. I've seen this post for a few times, but it's like people go into these rotation groups and they don't have the materials, but they're like, oh yeah, I want to go in and do the boss, but they can't contribute to it. I would say this issue doesn't really happen with PoE. Like, I've been playing this game for a really long time, and as far as like the rota runs, I think it comes down to the same idea of like people scamming and stuff. It's like, since Diablo is more a casual game, there's going to be people that kind of do that stuff, but with PoE, since most of the players are a little bit more respectable, there are still scammers out there, but for the most part, like, this isn't really even an issue. But what is an issue that ties into like trading, because I want to talk about PoE's problem with trade, is that there are scammers out there. So I want to make a dedicated video towards this, because there's going to be a lot of people, because there's so many people that are coming from Diablo 4 into PoE. It's going to be the first time, and I don't want you guys getting scammed. So if you're new here, make sure you are subscribed with the bell notification on, and I'll be dropping that video very soon. But I'm going to go over a bunch of common ways that people try to scam in the game. So one common thing that people will do is, like, Chaos Orbs at one point, how it would work is they come in stacks of 10. And normally you'd be like, okay, there's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50s, because 5 rows over here would be 50, and then you can see the person put 10, 1, 10, 10. So he's trying to make you think that they're all 10. And the reason why he puts them in stacks of 1 is because like you just glance over it, like whatever, yeah, hit accept. And there's other ways people scam. They'll sell items that look like another item. There's tons of different scams in PoE. Like I said, I'm going to make a dedicated video towards this, but it is something that is kind of a problem in the game because, well, it's not like an official like auction house where you type in the word headhunter, not a replica headhunter, or whatever the case may be. You do definitely got to watch out for different ways that people scam. Another common one is to sell you a gem that looks exactly the same as another gem. You hit trade and they're like, oh, sorry bro, my inventory's full, let me go like fix it. And then you're like, okay, whatever. And then he comes up, he hits trade, and then he throws in a different item, then he hits accept, and you're just like, okay, or whatever. And you don't like check the item, because even though you have to mouse over the item. They try to make it so you can't get scammed, which is kind of a good thing, but most people, like I said, with PoE, most people are not trying to scam. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is kind of like endgame builds. Now, Diablo 4 is going to be a little bit better with Season 7 because I look at the game where like Diablo 4 definitely lacks the end game, but now we can play multiple builds. So like, if I want to try out another build, I don't have to like respec everything. I mean, technically you'll have to do it once, but I can swap back to like different builds. Maybe I'm playing with my friend that needs to be power leveled and I want to play like a certain build, or maybe I'm tired of this build, but I want to try something else out, but I want to maybe kind of save this in case I want to go back and I want to go do high tier pit pushing later versus just doing some mythic boss or open world content, or again, some of the newer content over here. I don't know how difficult this is going to be, but maybe you want to do more of the headhunts. You can actually go back to a different build. I like this idea. With PoE, I'll be honest, I would say this is kind of a problem, but I'm not really too concerned about it. I look at like Diablo 4's like system as far as the armory, which is coming out in Season 7, as a pretty cool, exciting thing to try out newer things. And if the thing sucks, I just go back. I don't have to waste all that time and energy to like kind of remember like, what was my build? I don't have to go to and build a website. It's a very nice quality of life feature. But with Path of Exile, you don't really have that freedom of like, I'm tired of this build, I want to switch, but I might want to go back. No, there really isn't really any going back because there's too much in Path of Exile. So I don't know if I would consider this a problem. Like for me, I'm kind of excited to make a new build, but they said with Path of Exile 2, the campaign's going to be 50 hours, which is like a very long time, so you may not want to actually make another character to try out like a same class but a different build. It may be very, very like extensive to do this, so it might be kind of the same problem that Diablo 4 had earlier on, where like you have to respec everything. But with Path of Exile, it's not just like your items, your tree, and so many things that you do in the game are really tied to like your passives. And I don't want to make this video too long, go over all the passives, but there are passives that completely change build, like one of them, Chaos Inoculation. Your maximum HP is 1. So if you're running a build that runs this and you want to run another build that doesn't run it, or that needs to run this for a complete different build, all of your gear that has maximum life is basically useless. So it's a lot harder to try to make different builds in PoE. However, I will say with PoE's flexibility, this is exciting to me personally, but for the people that don't have 30 hours a day to spend in action RPGs, this may be too overwhelming. Again, like just looking at this tree, like I mentioned before, one problem that PoE has is like you go from level 1 to level 2 and you open up this, you're just like, dude, what the heck? But again, if you're brand new to the game, definitely watch my videos or other people's guides. It will help you out significantly with the game because there are certain pathings and different choices that legitimately can break your build. And if you were to, let's say, take this and you didn't have the gold or the orb of regret to like refund this, you could actually mess up your build. And knowing that instead of the campaign being about 10-ish hours, which is kind of the normal time, you're looking at, again, 50 hours where, you could kind of screw over your build. And I think for beginners, it's going to be a learning curve, but I would say don't let this video scare you. It's more so just going to be a game where it's going to require you to pay attention. Whereas Diablo, big number go up, yes, okay, green arrows, good, right? Attack power, right? Even though attack power is a pretty bad stat, and in fact, I think they should remove it from the game. But yeah, there's so many tools at your disposal with Path of Exile, but I just kind of want to go over a bunch of like the problems that PoE and Diablo have and kind of compare how they actually interact. But that's going to wrap up the video. If there's anything else that you felt like I missed out on, definitely let me know in the comment section below, as there's going to be a lot of new players and I want to make videos and guides for everyone, whether you are a veteran with PoE or brand new to the game. That is what my goal is. So subscribe if you guys want to see that, and definitely subscribe for the scam video, because that's going to be very important, because, well, no one really likes getting scammed in any video game or just in general. Anyways, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.